Steve, we started on a topic last week I wanted to have more time to flesh out, and that's really is several topics all in one, but it's how guys get over these days. How do guys get over these days? There's so few places to work now. A lot of guys are timid, they're afraid to get heat with people. But it used to be that the wild Indian, wrestlers sometimes were the ones who got over and made all the money. They used to experiment with guys and see what was in them rather than just giving them a gimmick and saying, okay, here you are, go do that, Coco do. Um, you basically, because they pretty much, I was there, they gave up fucking with you, trying to make you something that you weren't and giving you managers and everything, and just threw their hands up and said, oh, fuck it, just let him be himself. And that's when you got over. It's organic in nature, and a lot of guys that when they're getting into business today, they think they already know the way everything works because they've read about it on the internet. Henceforth, it's harder for them to learn the right way from scratch. If you were just getting into business today, how would you go about trying to present yourself, get yourself over? What's the do's and don'ts? What should young aspiring wrestlers watch out for that will bite them in the ass?
Man, I tell you, last week we were talking about, I've been watching the Legends of Mid-South. And when you watch that particular 3 DVD set, you'll notice that everybody in there, all the heels have a mean streak for the most part. There's a couple of matches that aren't so great, but there's some really good matches on there. And then all the baby faces have a ton of fire, and it's real fire. They're not having to manufacture it. But hey, man, in a world that's a work, let's call it a work, make believe, whatever you want to call it. People still want to believe. So you make. It could be one of those deals where if we had 10 matches on the card, and we had a great crew back in the day when I was running, but let's just say the card wasn't so great, and it's like they had one of the comedy acts on. It's like, okay, all that other stuff was bullshit. Stone Cold's fixing to get in there with Brett, and this shit's real. Make yourself as real as possible because people still want to believe in you. So if you make your shit strong, I mean, you sell, you can know the difference between a sell, a register, fire, a mean streak, crisp bumps. You want a pro style. And to me, when I talk about a pro style, like a Ric Flair style, a Bobby Eaton style where your shit looks good. That's the thing about Bobby Eaton's work. It was so good. It just looked crisp. But it didn't look like it was strong style. Strong style in Japan, okay for what it is. But I'm talking about American pro wrestling.
Strong style is basically hitting each other as hard as you can and barely selling it.
Yeah,
whereas American pro wrestling was the idea of making it look as devastating as possible while actually making as little contact as possible and selling the shit out of it.
Well, take Ricky and Robert, rock and roll. On the other hand, I mean, man, those guys, you'd like them, Ricky Morton, and you barely feel that guy. And then he'd have you in an arm lock, and he'd have your arm twisted around. And, that's nothing Bobby was so good at, and Dennis and Stan. You want everything to look good. But anyway,
you remember Bobby Eaton's high knee drop off the top rope.
Of course.
If you would look at the guys, the Atlanta TV job guys, the first time they ever took that, they'd been watching it on TV, and they thought, well, okay, here we go. My chest is going to be caved in. They're going to pick me up with a spatula. And then you would look at their face after they took it for the first time, and then they'd always, oh, Bobby, give me the knee, give me the knee. He never touched the guy. It looked like he was killing him.
Yeah. But, the thing about I feel bad for the guys. I don't feel bad. I think it's rough. It's harder for the guys these days to get over and just to go out there because, a few months ago I interviewed Vince McMahon on the WWE Network on the Steve Austin Show podcast. And, he says, hey, man, just go out there and I give people an opportunity and go out there and grab that brass ring. But, in trying to grab that brass ring by being hungry and, back in the day, I had a little bit more of a free platform when the Ringmaster thing wasn't working out so great, and I was drinking beer one night watching that special on that serial killer and came up with a Stone Cold, idea. I didn't have the name, but came up with the idea, and that thing was born. And I knew, like, hey, man, it should have get off the pot. I've been in the business 7.5 years. WCW fired me because I wasn't marketable. I paid my dues. I was a pretty good mechanic. I got to come up with the gimmick end of this, which ended up being my personality turned up to a 10. So I went out there and started talking all that trash on TV. And, this is back when we were trying to save money, and every other Monday Night Raw was live, and the other one was went to Post. And when I watched the show back from Post, all my lines were edited out when I was doing color commentary or whatever. And that's when I had that meeting with Vince, and he's walking across the parking lot. I said, hey, man, you got a second? He goes, yeah. I said, hey, man, when I notice when I'm watching the show, you're cutting out a lot of my lines. I'm just wondering why this is. He goes, well, quite frankly, Steve, because I was supposed to be a heel. He goes, well, quite frankly, you're popping the guys in the truck. Popping means you're getting a reaction. You know,
yeah.
Oh, shit, he didn't just say that, and they're laughing because I was talking.
And that's the idea.
Yeah, if you can pop the guys in a truck, who's a tough, because they've seen it all. That's the toughest audience in the world, the guys in a truck. If you can pop the guys in a truck, you can pop the world. So I told him, I said, hey, Vince, I said, I'm 6'2", 250, bald head, goatee, black trunk, black boots. I said, you got guys here 6'10", 7 feet, 300, 350 pounds. I said, if you take my personality from me, I can't compete. But if you give it to me, I said, I'm good. He goes, okay, Steve. So anyway, that's when he stopped editing my stuff. But I don't know that you can have that conversation with Vince anymore. And I wasn't afraid to crawl out on a limb, use middle fingers, push the language barrier. And I didn't say fuck and shit and stuff like that. But, man, I was going to go out on a limb because I wasn't afraid to. And these days, because there was other options, I wasn't afraid to anyway, but that's just the way I was going to roll. I was dialed in. It was a competitive atmosphere, and I was going for broke. These days, if you go for broke and you piss somebody off because you got too aggressive, your ass is either going to get sent back to the Bush League, shit canned, or oh, shit, we can't work with this guy. He's a loose cannon, you know.
Yeah,
so I feel like the guys these days are really handcuffed. It's one thing to say, hey, go for it. But it's a whole other thing for the talent to say, you know what, fuck it, I am going for it.
Well,
even
yeah.
I might pick
How do you know
off.
how do you know how far is too far? The squeaky wheel either gets greased or replaced, and you don't know how far to go. And that's the problem. I think is that there used to be options, and also the guys used to. It wasn't a publicly traded company. Let's say the guys were used to being yelled and screamed at, or yelling and screaming, and there was cussing going on, and many horrible things have been said in wrestling locker rooms. But then you out of that, you hammered out what you wanted to do.
But
Let me ask you this. Go ahead. I was just going to ask you this.
The wrestling business is a hard-ass business. When you really, if you want to go back down into, like when you started and I started, and I was on the back end of the territory systems, I mean, and so I went around some of those real hard dressing rooms, but I mean, dude, I'm talking about, you know, it was competitive as fuck. And, you know, sometimes out there, I mean, it was a work, but I mean, you was fighting to get your shit in. Or you're, you know, listening to a guy and you're paying your dues. But I mean, it's a hard world, and it's still a hard world, but you throw all the politics in there, it's a hard world in a different respect, and very frustrating on top of that.
And that's what I was going to ask you, is compounding the problem with, okay, how far do you go in speaking up and doing your own thing and saying, hey, that's not me, or whatever, to be yourself. Also, do you think it hampers the guys getting into business now, that they've read so much, they've heard on the internet, they know so much, et cetera? And you talked about you and Brett going out there and having a match where it was aggressive and the shit was laid in there, and it wasn't called a lot ahead of time. It was reaction rather than acting. It was reacting. Do you think, I'm looking at Conor McGregor right now, who's, you know, Ric Flair or Gino Hernandez at the press conference with his boots, his expensive boots, and his suit, you know, leaned up on the table, and he's cutting the promo. And the only difference is it's a real fight, but he was, you know, any wrestling heel that could really talk in a suit that had a lot of heat. They're, you know, we're not using it. They might as well. But the guys getting into business now, they approach it as a performance instead of trying to make people believe it was real, which back then we had to try to make people believe it was real so we wouldn't get fired, because that's what they were supposed to think. But it allowed you to get in that mindset, and whether it was a fight or a promo, you were trying your dead level best to be in the zone where you're mad or you're excited or you're whatever emotion, and sell it like that. And now guys are, unfortunately to me, coming up with, well, can we get this particular spot in, or that routine, or that set of moves, and they're forgetting that the facial expression of hatred or fear or whatever, and the body language and the passion that you put into it physically is more than the routine that you are choreographing to recite later on in front of people. Does that make any sense?
Well, it makes sense, but then also because they are, you know, building in the acting part of it so much, a lot of it's overdone in the portrayal of anger. So, like, I see your point. Like going back to when we were talking about the body language of Jerry Lawler, you could see him from behind and know what his facial was because of the body language. These days, I feel like a lot of the talent, the guys are overacting and, like doing the obvious, trying to sell the real 100, which you always do, but, they're overacting. And so the best thing you can do is, what I see a lot of today is guys going to the crowd, looking to the crowd for a response and in a sense pandering. And if you go back to watch some of this older stuff, I'm talking stuff that's 20 and 30 years old, but you watch, those guys really aren't working the crowd to a very large degree at all. They're keeping all the work, all the looks within the ring and controlling that crowd. Now, then you put the showmanship of working that crowd and acknowledge them, but it's just a once over on the shoulder or, when the time is right. But people now are going out there and they're so hungry to try, because anytime you do something in the ring, Jim, you do it to elicit a response, especially in regards to a high spot. And based on that response, you proceed accordingly. Of course, now it's all mapped out. But, when you do something and get a response, you don't automatically have to look to the crowd to say, okay, I heard that.
Yeah.
Don't go to the crowd too much. Keep the match in the ring. And that's what I did, Jim, when I told you.
Or even worse, when you look to the crowd like, watch what I'm about to do. That's when you're really begging, right?
Oh, exactly. But see, when I was first down in WCW and the USWA, and that was a weekly territory, and that's the best thing about that place was you were in the same towns every goddamn same day of the week, the whole loop. You know the loop. And so, like, you couldn't, a lot of times you'll get in a program with a guy and you go on cruise control and you got your match that you'll take around the horn for a month or two. Hey, man, not over there. You've got to you're there every single week, so you got to keep changing shit up. You can't call the same spots.
I'm doing research. I'm doing research, so I know this for a fact. Jerry Lawler and Jimmy Valiant wrestled each other in the main event at the Louisville Gardens during one period, 1977 to 78, 15 out of 20 weeks. And all the matches were different. And Jerry Lawler never won clean with no rebuttal until number 15. But they kept it interesting. And you mentioned the reaction from the crowd. I noticed that now it's the big thing to get the crowd clapping and et cetera, et cetera. But the difference, and it's a subtle one, but you've picked up on it, is now the wrestlers play to the crowd to get them up and then do their thing, whereas years ago, the wrestlers did their thing, which got the crowd up, and then they looked at their shoulder and acknowledged that they were up and said, okay, you're with me, good, then watch this, and right back to it.
My question is, where did the sea change come in? I mean, this is an explanation of what's happening, but why did it happen?
It to me, Steve, what do you think? Was it really the mid-90s when nothing was working because corporate wrestling was sucking and nothing was going on, and they just went to so many extremes that we tipped from pro wrestling to sports entertainment? Was that at the point where we lost a generation? A lot of guys, left the business. Not many were getting in it. What happened?
Man, that's a damn good question as far as how the timeline of when it happened. I just know I'd gotten out of the business, and I'm certainly not putting it on my back. But therefore, for a period of time, I didn't really watch, and now I DVR the show and I try to watch here and there or fast forward to commercials to try to catch what the main event is. As these guys are building towards Mania to see what the matches are going to be or how the storyline. I mean, is there any heat going into Mania? Don't let me get off the subject. I'll stay on it. I don't know where the shift really happened, Jim, but I just know that when I went out for a year to get my neck fused up in about 2000, and that's when Triple H and Rock had a hell of a year, and I came back, things had changed, and that's kind of when they started handing out promos, and we'd never, ever done that before. And then, guys are really getting together and starting to talk more and more and more about the matches. And, going back to the WCW days, hell, if I was working with Bobby Eaton, I got the TV title off Bobby. And fuck, I remember I went to TV and they said, hey, we're going to take the title off Bobby. Well, fuck, me and Bobby didn't talk about shit but the finish. And all of a sudden we go out there and we have a match. And this is across the board, my entire run in WCW. you know, you talk about the finish of your match really for 10 to 15 minutes max, and you go out there and call it in the ring.
Yeah.
So, and then that's how that system works. And of course, USWA was always called in the ring because a lot of the times there were separate dressing facilities across the arena, and Frank Morrell was giving the finishes to both guys. And you know the setup over there.
Hey, when I was a rookie, when I was a rookie, I used to go to the ring at spot shows without even knowing what the finish was, because Lawler'd be playing cards on the other side of the locker room. So I'll tell him in the ring, and we'd go half the match and wouldn't know what was going on. So yeah, I was used to that, but that's.
I don't know what it changed to answer your question.
The other question I kind of have is,
I don't think, to do that. Go ahead, Alice.
The other question I have is, so if you create an atmosphere where you're supplying everybody with their promos and sort of how their matches are going to go, does that create a sense of timidity when you get to the point where they say, well, why aren't you grabbing for the brass ring? It's like, you haven't trusted me so far in terms of being able to speak for myself or make my own matches or, you know, create them as they go or whatever. Does that create that atmosphere?
Do they rely on it? Does it either create timidity or do they start relying on it and don't figure out their own shit?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, man, I don't know. I don't really know the system right now. I've enjoyed the 1 hour show of NXT. I really enjoy it because it's very, man, I hate to use this word, but I will. It has more organic feel to it. Pretty good little crowd there, and it's not the same crowd every single week, but they kind of got a little bit of community there as well. But, man, there's some good wrestling matches going on and as they're wrestling about as much as you can. And the women specifically are wrestling more so than just a spot fest. I don't know, but it's good. And the work by the guys, I mean, that Adrian Neville, whatever his name is, I mean, that dude's kicking ass over. That guy has some lights out matches. Him and
they've turned a 180 in terms of before. You know, what was it? 4 or 5 years ago, they wouldn't touch anybody that had been an independent wrestler, which was crazy to me. Yeah. Because if you're an independent wrestler, that means you really badly want to be a fucking professional wrestler. If you're an independent wrestler, that's exactly who I'd want working for me. Now they've turned the 180 and they brought in the Prince Devitt and they brought in Steen and they brought in Generico and they brought in, oh my God, what's the Japanese kid's name?
Oh, Kenta, Hideo Itami.
Otami now, but Kenta. But the point is, they're getting the best from Japan, the best from England, the best from the independents now.
Well, here's the thing, Jim. You know those guys that we just mentioned? Those guys all have over 10 years experience.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a product with an average age of at least 10 years in the ring. Pretty impressive. And these guys didn't, like you said, they come from the Indies, Japan, or wherever. But all of them been and hell, I mean, going to Balor, he's got 14 or 15 years in the ring. Yeah. Same with Neville. So these guys are badass hands. All of a sudden they brought them on board, and like Triple H says, they're learning, I guess, the WWE playbook. But it's going to be interesting to see now that they've been out trying to recruit wrestlers from
that's
amateur programs, NFL players. What is the future of these people coming up? Because when you look out there on the indie scene, and I'm not real close to it, but, you know, it seems like back in the day, Jim, and you answer this for me, because it seemed like when I was growing up, I just thought everybody wanted to be a wrestler. Somebody's going to pile out of the woodwork. And so, man, it's really a shallow talent pool out there, and I'm not disrespecting any of the guys. I'm just saying there's very few people who seem to want to get into the business.
Oh, you're correct. You're correct, and it's a day. You talk to Danny Davis. The calls are slow at OVW. The calls are slow. Now, let me say this: you get plenty of calls, but from people who really generally have no business trying to be a professional wrestler. But from the people who you actually, you know, think there's the future of the business. No, they're slim. A lot of people want to be in the UFC these days. But I'll tell you exactly where the change came from, because the change came from wrestling used to get its prospects from the territories where they were in the same town every night, where the fans followed the guys to the building and to the liquor store or to the hotel or whatever. Not only the girls followed them, but guys did too, because they saw a bunch of guys on TV driving big cars, making money. Girls loved them, idols of millions in the arenas. How can I get in on this? And then they were the really motivated ones that had what it took and would put up with a bunch of bullshit, which were the ones that were going to stick with it the longest. they finally found somebody to train them and they got into business. There were no wrestling schools. You really had to, it was like getting in the mafia. But once you were a made man, you were there for life. Now, there are no regular stops in town. You know, people say, oh, these guys are big stars on TV, but it's national TV. There's a disconnect. A lot of the guys in Elizabethtown, Kentucky may not think that they could be stars on WWF TV, but they could on Memphis TV. And they had all those girls following them around and making the money and blah, 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 blah. Without a strong territory system, you lose a lot of that, of the guys that were really motivated to get into business, being able to get in it. And so now anybody can get into wrestling business these days, but practically nobody can make any money at it. I don't.
Man, well, it's so hard to get into business these days because I still get emails all the time. People say, hey, man, where's a good place to go learn? And, you know, you can mention, you know, a handful of schools scattered across the United States and, of course, Lance Storm's over in Canada.
Yeah.
But it's just like, well, fuck, I mean.
But the thing is, anybody can get in the business, but you just can't really make it. You can't be a professional in the business and do it full time without a lot more work. But you've seen people who are in the business.
You know, one thing that is disappointing for me is, you know, back in the old days, I mean, you had a guy like, say like a Bruiser Brody, that body type, just kind of like a big in-shape dude. I mean,
yeah.
You know, Brody was Brody. I mean, that's a man's man right there, brother, and should be in the Hall of Fame. But then you had a guy like Wahoo McDaniels, and you had a guy like Dusty Rhodes, and you had Dick Murdoch. Okay, and I just listed, what, 4 guys, different body types who work their ass off. These days, man, it's damn near. It's funny because the NXT guys are a little bit on the smaller side, but the WWE roster, man, I mean, damn near if you ain't, you know, 6'2", and pretty good looking dude with a physique, I don't know if you got a chance.
Well, see, once again, the today's wrestlers grew up watching as fans the smaller guys that could do more stuff, and they thought that was cool. But Vince is still of the time, the brass ring. Did they still have brass rings anymore? But Vince is still the time where you had to look like the Ultimate Warrior to be his vision of a top wrestling star. So is Vince going to have to come around and use the younger, smaller, quicker guys that like to perform, or is he still going to stick with the guys got to be fucking Sid to be a top guy, in your opinion?
I don't know that there's that many guys that are going to be top guys, that if you don't have I don't want to say a move set, but I mean, if you can't go out there and tell, you know, goddamn, if you're going to get on pay-per-view, we don't have pay-per-views anymore, but if you're going to go out there on the WWE Network and be in that main event, I mean, you're looking at putting in minimum of 18 to 25, and if you can't do that, you know, mister, you're in trouble. So it's almost like you just buying a war of attrition, take back to the smaller guys.
Well, you know, and that's something else too. The whole business has changed in the way that we keep score for ourselves about whether we're a success or not in terms of draws. Everybody says, well, so-and-so's never drawn money. It's almost getting to the point where no individual can really draw money today. I mean, there's a couple. There's a Cena or Taker in the right instance or whatever, but has it ever been a period of time in the wrestling business where it was harder for the talent to keep score of how valuable they were? You can't really go by the houses anymore because half the time it's just WWE comes to town live once a year. It used to be able to kind of go by the pay-per-views, but now pay-per-view, the network has changed that. Wrestling has always been like any other combat sport, boxing, mixed martial arts through its existence, whatever. It was 2 personalities. We're going to have a fight. We're going to sell tickets, or however we're going to charge people to view it. And they're going to want to see this so bad, it's going to be big business. And now it's getting away from those personalities at the top of the marquee, so-and-so versus so-and-so, and just see the show live when it comes to town. Has it ever been harder for the boys to tell what their worth was to the company?
Man, I don't know how you tell what your worth is, because that's a damn good question. But then to me, it also stems back to the presentation of, you know, taking that show out on the road, because again, man, you know, when I talk about I'm old school guy, and man, when you brought up Lance Russell, there's a guy that needs to be in the Hall of Fame. But you know, going back to Jim Ross, Jay Lawler, you know, the classic guys calling the matches, you know, presenting the matches in a serious fashion, and you know, damn near like a shoot, and it's show business, but in a serious way. And because they've been instructed to, the guys are shucking and jiving these days and talking about everything and the app and all this stuff. And man, they do a phenomenal job at that. But they're not allowing me to take the product seriously that I'm watching with my eyes visually. And then I got a disconnect because of the laissez-faire type, attitude and the jokes and all the just random thoughts that all of a sudden pop into their head. I want to hear about that wrestling match, man. I want to hear about how so-and-so is attacking this body part. I'm still that guy. So the presentation to me has a lot to do with the show that goes out on the road. But to go back to answering your question of how you place a value on who's doing what, I don't know. I don't know.
Let me ask you another question then. Is what you just said, is it because that fewer people that have been in the boots of a wrestler or been in the position of a performer on the program or a performer in front of live crowds, fewer of those are involved in creative at the high level than ever before, and it kind of has to filter down to the agents who then have to I did that in TNA where I would get from creative this and I would have to sell it to the boys and try to figure out a way of actually making it make sense in application. Would you ever, when Stone Cold Steve Austin was the hottest box office attraction in wrestling, if they came up to you and said, okay, Steve, we're going to threaten to fire you and you're going to beg for your job because you don't want to be unemployed, would that have flown with Stone Cold Steve Austin? Why are the guys suddenly living paycheck to paycheck in the biggest company in wrestling and they have to beg for their jobs, or being fired is a horrible thing to hang over their head? Are the guys superheroes and anti-heroes and super villains like they used to be, or are they henpecked actors that are playing a part and the evil authority puts them down? It's almost like Austin McMahon was the hottest program in history of wrestling because one guy finally said to his boss, take this job and shove it. Now they're doing the Authority versus the Wrestlers program where the wrestlers come out like the pussies.
Yeah, man, it's just because they're in a no-win situation because Authority's got to get over on everybody. And, here's the thing, back in the day when me and Vince were doing that thing, I don't know if they'd done before us or they've obviously been done after us. Haven't seen every wrestling program on every show that's ever been done. But, like now, it's a mainstay just because in a war of attrition, you need talent out there on the air that can perform. And, of course, hey, man, the fucking Triple H is cutting the best promos of his life. Stephanie's always been platinum on a microphone. But, man, as the Authority and the be-all, end-all is power, and because of, everybody knows what's up, and it's almost like, everybody's waiting to see what the pencils wrote for the show rather than, the ramifications that are really executed within the angle. Who's got heat with who because, they're squashing this person, so they must have done something to piss so-and-so off. So the Authority is, I don't know, it's too much front and center these days, but it is that because there's not enough guys or veteran talent on the roster that they can write storylines, seemingly, because why else, would you have the Authority if you and again, I'm not speaking about any of the guys, I'm just saying there's not enough of the guys that are in a position to draw money that they can write stories for. I mean,
well,
would you concur with that?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yes, we had Lance Storm on the program here a few weeks ago because he came up with the concept of basically they've been programming the people, the fans, that the owners of the WWE, the evil empire, the McMahon family, whatever, the Authority, are the bad guys and the evil manipulators and the people, for so long, for 20 years now almost, that why do they get surprised when the fans say, well, we'll try to hijack the show from these evil people and we'll try to cheer for the wrestlers we want, and etc. It's almost like I always said the first two David Von Erich Memorial shows in the Texas Stadium in World Class, they had matches that needed stadiums. And for everyone afterwards, they had a stadium that needed a match. It's almost like with you and Vince, it was perfect. It was different. It was ahead of its time. The performances on both sides were fabulous. And there had never been a heel promoter in all of wrestling, only behind the scenes, not actually publicly. So that was new. But now it's almost like, well, we've got to have a heel running the company. So how are we going to do it? And in the process, the wrestlers, instead of like you standing up to the guy and saying, kiss my ass and, the stunner and the whole 9 yards, are suddenly begging for their jobs, and they have families to support, and they've got the human problems.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
on the
want
other
to see a
side of
hero
that,
with human problems.
yeah, I know, but on the other side of that, people know that it's a shoot, that there's nowhere else for these guys to go.
Yeah.
It's like,
But you know what?
I don't know, man.
I want to be the guy that comes out and says, "You dumb fucks! Don't you realize you've been paying me $500,000 a year for the last 3 years? I saved my money. You can go piss up a rope. I don't need the job next week." That's the guy I want to. I don't know. Anyway, hey, before we get off here, let's let you do some business and talk about the various programs you do and the various places we can see them. Beginning with your podcast on Podcast One, right? You were the one who started the whole thing over there at Podcast One, I think.
Well, I started at Podcast One. I certainly wasn't the first guy from the wrestling business to do a podcast, but those guys reached out to me. So I do 2 shows a week. I do one on Tuesday. It's a family-friendly show. I watch the language on that. And then the Thursday show carries an explicit content and everything but the kitchen sink on that one. And you can download both shows for free by going to podcast1.com and finding Steve Austin Show or Steve Austin Show Unleashed. That's the explicit one. You go to iTunes, download for free, and if you subscribe to the show, that way they get kicked to you and you're never going to miss a show. With regards to my reality shows, I'm thinking Redneck Island might come back for season 4. They made a format change. I don't know how successful that was. I kind of dug the old format a little bit better than the new one, but with respect to the cast, very nice cats. I had a great time hanging out with those folks. I believe Broken Skull Challenge ought to get lit up for season 3, but I'm still waiting to hear from that, and hopefully we'd start filming that ASAP. I'm ready to get back to work doing the podcast. Working on I got a couple other things in the fire, Jim. I can't announce yet, but I'm working 2 days a week on this podcast. And, dude, as you know, man, these things take a lot of work to put together. And sometimes I'm making literally chicken salad out of chicken shit because sometimes I just run out of things that come into my brain. But I'm getting ready to jump in my RV. I'm heading down to Texas with Hershey the Wonder Dog, where I'm going to go out there and do work at the Broken Skull Ranch, kind of chill and go into hermit mode. And
there you go.
Get in shape. But that's really all I've got to plug.
It is stressful. It is stressful because, like, Alice and I try to give off and we certainly do a good job of convincing people that we have no professional standards on this program and it's just all off the top of our head. But we actually do a little preparation and at least think of some things to talk about to try to be entertaining. So it takes up your time. But it seems like every time I see a movie advertisement on my cable on demand, you're sticking your face in it somewhere or another. As the one of the big action stars of the modern era. I knew you when you had hair.
Yeah, but here's the thing about you, Jim, because this is going back to your old promos, man. Like back when you was irritating the hell out of me, I was like, man, when is this guy going to shut up? You're like Stevie Ray Vaughan on a guitar. You just never stopped. So I figured the podcast thing for you would be obviously it's easy for you and do a tremendous job at it. But here's one thing about you that I guess I've kind of made this assumption, because you booked so many different territories and booked for so long, really a big part of your life is chronicled on paper so that you can flip a page, know the card, know the payoffs, know the house. But also when you just have that information, all these other stories pop in that you vibrantly remember. I didn't write anything down, and so I always tell people, it's a shoot. I forgot half my career, and here's a little tidbit of advice that I'm going to give everybody before I get off the phone, and I appreciate you guys having me on your show. I talked to a WWE superstar, a talent. He's not a superstar yet. And I said, hey, man, here's what you need to do, because someone told me this a long time ago, and I didn't do it. You need to get your ass a little notebook. And I'm telling this to all the guys down there in NXT, the WWF, wherever you're at. Get your damn notebook and write you a journal every goddamn day, whether you write 3 sentences or 5 paragraphs. You write down what you did that day, what happened traveling, how the house was, what you made. Write all this shit down, because you know what? If a chance is that you end up making it, you got a hell of a goddamn account of your career, and you can write a damn good book which will become a bestseller, and you'll make a shit pile of money off of it. And I wish I'd have done that back in the day. And I know, a couple of the guys that did it and have been real successful writing books. But if you have
if for no other reason than you can steal all the great finishes that all the different bookers that you worked for gave you.
But and at the end of the day, say you have a 10-year career and it wasn't. Hey, maybe you're not going to make $1 million off a book. The thing about it is, you got all those memories right there, and it just goes to show that big body of hard work and all the good times and bad times, and the flat tires and the blowjobs and stuff like that. You can put all that shit in there. And
Terry Taylor had one of those books. Terry Taylor actually had one of those books, believe it or not. I'm sure you do believe it. But
speaking of Terry Taylor, though, he had a tremendous story about when he was going to wrestle Flair there at the Superdome. When Flair came in, disheveled, same clothes for 3 days, reeked of alcohol, and Terry Taylor was working with him. They were working in the main event. And goddamn, Taylor didn't think Flair was going to give him a match. And like 40 minutes later, he was begging Flair to pin him. And they had that match on that DVD. It was a great match, especially the finish. But Taylor was a guy who told me way back in the day, he goes, man, always write down all your expenses. And anytime you saw Terry Taylor, and we was flying Southwest a lot back in those days, he'd have all his receipts on that little fold-out tray from the seat in front of him, and he was doing it. He was doing his expenses and being accountable for his money. Get a lot of kids in the business these days don't take account of their taxes. They spend on the gross and don't think about the net. All of a sudden, you end up with no money. So that was one thing that Terry Taylor, I didn't do my system like he did, but at least he was using his time productively. When you got to, you can either sleep on an airplane, drink like I did, or have your thumb up your ass. He was productive and took care of his paperwork.
Well, and that's the thing is everybody kept their book, because not only was it your book for the wrestling business in terms of finishes and angles and what the show drew and et cetera, but it was also your book for the government in terms of what your expenses were and keep up with your taxes, which once again is the number one killer in professional wrestling is the IRS. So from me and Steve Austin, ladies and gentlemen.
That and cocaine.
Well, there you go. Actually, I think the fucking government probably beat him. But anyway, one more thing before you go then, and I'm not going to make the mistake that every other broadcaster, podcaster, interviewer, et cetera, makes and say, oh, Steve, when's your one last match going to take place? And blah, blah, blah. What I'm going to ask you is, regardless of whether it's WrestleMania or any other big event or just an independent show down the street, if you could have one more match with anybody in the world that you wanted to wrestle, and you were as good as you ever were on your best day in the ring, who would it be? And since we're going that far, who would it be and where would it be?
God dang, man, that's just a
and Hulk Hogan right now, Hulk Hogan has his mouth open and there's almost slobber hanging off the fucking chin just to say, please save me, brother, please save me.
When I look back and you watch how physical Stan Hansen was in New Japan, Jesus Christ, it would have been interesting to experience, 15 to 20 minutes with that guy, or Bruiser Brody type, and obviously, it'd been great for me. I worked a few times with Ric Flair, but, that was post prime for Flair, and I say that with due respect because the dude, he's my favorite of all time.
Well, yeah, especially people that have wrestled for 45 fucking years got to expect that at some point post time is going to be attached to their fucking career.
Yeah, and like John Cena, because I think, that I could get something out of John Cena that no one else has gotten before, a different level of intensity. And, of course, Brock Lesnar, just because of the physicality. I think that guy's on fire right now. It'll be interesting to see what happens with his contract. Is he leveraging UFC? Is he going to stick around with WWF? But he is a guy just because me and him are pretty good friends. We don't talk too much, but I like what we could do in the ring would be really, really unique. But just because I found out a little bit more about the backstory of CM Punk, I'd really like to work a program with CM Punk from a promo standpoint, a work standpoint, and just for the fuck of it, I'd probably go right now at this point. And, CM Punk.
I think that's probably the biggest money matchup because obviously of the dream matches that would conceivably take place, you and Hogan, et cetera. I just like the idea that somebody escaped the leg drop their whole career, managed to escape that leg drop, and he never got that one up. But anyway, um, probably the biggest money draw. You or Brock or you or Punk right now would draw more money than probably any other matchup currently available in the wrestling industry, and that's actually a shame. Because we're talking about fictional matchups that would draw more money than anything we've got on the horizon. But you and Brock would be tremendous curiosity from both the UFC fans and the wrestling fans as to what was going to happen. Especially, I know you guys would skirt the edge of is this actually real? Is this happening, or were they working us, or
Right.
what? And you and Punk, from a standpoint of, he would want to be such a perfectionist to rise to that occasion, and the promos would be off the charts. Well,
Yeah.
the promos with Brock would be off the charts too, because Heyman would be doing the talking.
God damn, Heyman's in his zone right now, mister. He's cutting some hellacious promos. Hey, real quickly, I know this is your show, but have you paid attention to the build to Mania? Are you watching it all?
I have not. To
Okay.
be honest, but it's not even. I'm not even, just being that way to the WWE now. I'm mostly wrestling free, except the New Japan shows on Axis, and just a few things. Just because I'm just, I'm trying to keep my blood pressure down. But
I understand that. Well, and me
But
too, to a point. Just 3 hours is such a long show. But since you brought up New Japan, man, I saw that Dragon Gate, whatever the fucking promo pay-per-view was a while back. I really like that Nakamura guy. I think he could have a hell of a run in the States.
Oh,
And-
Shinsuke is amazing, and it was Wrestle Kingdom. Wrestle Kingdom.
yeah, the one that JR called at the Tokyo Dome.
Yeah, correct. Man, I think
And-
that guy, if you brought his ass to the States, I think he'd light it up.
And see, that's why whenever I watch that, and of course they've New Japan and the Japanese promotions in general have loosened up a little bit on the sports-based presentation with interference and et cetera, et cetera. But still, I always, when I see something like that, I think, if only we'd have channeled those resources for good. If only a big budget promotion that had actually had some guidance and knew what it was doing would have put money and thought into building a more sports-based presentation of pro wrestling, as us folks down south were used to when we were young folks, as opposed to just the sports entertainment. We would have two healthy industries and guys could bounce back and forth. Now we've got one sports entertainment industry and no pro wrestling industry, and a lot of people are having to leave our business and go to the UFC when they can. And it is so somebody else. We're training Dana White's next generation right now. Anyway, Steve, thank you. I'm not going to keep you on here all day, and thank Hershey for giving us this time with you. But we will all continue to listen to the podcast on Podcast One and watch the reality programs and wait for that announcement of you versus Hulk Hogan in an I Quit match at WrestleMania 30, whatever the fuck. I know that's imminently forthcoming.
Hey, that sounds like a plan, Jim. Again, I appreciate you having me on the show. It's always great to talk to you. Anytime that you, of all people, can't come up with any kind of content and you need a guest, give me a shout. I'll fill in.
Well, I tell you, I appreciate that because I do go blank and have brain farts on a regular basis. So maybe we'll just make you the revolving fourth week.
Hey, dude, I'll do the same because there's a lot of times I need help. I need someone to help a brother out, so I'll do the same. But I appreciate you having me on the show, man.